Join me for a conversation with the creator of the Dungeons & Dragons setting, Spelljammer.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, I have a fantastic interview coming right up. But first, if you would do me a favor, if you could like, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to it right now, that would be totally amazing. Those things help the show out immensely, and I could really use your help. I really try hard to bring you a interesting episode each and every week, and I hope that deserves a 5-star rating from you guys or a review in your favorite podcast player or catcher or whatever they're called these days. Also, you can find my books at dicegeeks.com, Amazon.com, and DriveThruRPG.com. I create resource books that help you cut down your prep time at the gaming table and have more fun. Just search for the Books of Random Tables or type in Dice Geeks into Google and you will find my books. All right, guys, here's today's interview. My guest today is author and game designer Jeff Grubb. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure to speak with you today. Jeff, just first, how were you first introduced to tabletop role-playing games? I'm going to guess it was Dungeons & Dragons.
It was Dungeons & Dragons. It was Dungeons & Dragons in the little wood grain box with the Greyhawk supplement.
Oh,
That's
wow.
what was out back in those days. This was 75, 76.
Oh, wow.
I was at Purdue University, West Lafayette, Indiana. And I had previously in high school played a lot of war games. Avalon Hill, S&T, and Purdue had a wargaming club on Friday night. So I showed up on Friday night at Stewart Center, and there were some people with tank miniatures. There were a couple people with board games, and there was a group over in the corner that was sitting around yelling at each other with dice, and they didn't have a board out. And I wandered over and I asked, what's going on? And they handed me 3 6-sided dice and said, here, we need a cleric. And it's been downhill ever since. I started running my own campaign at Purdue. From that, I was working, designing tournament modules for Gen Con, and then started working for TSR full time.
Wow. And that is amazing. Was your plan to be like a writer or was game designer on the radar in 75 or whatever?
Game designer was not on the radar in 75. Isaac Asimov's job was on the radar because he had like columns in analog. Mm-hmm. That were, basically Isaac Asimov explains things to people. And I thought that was a great gig. So, basically I was a civil engineer by training because, writers starve.
Yeah.
I did win some writing awards when I was in college, and we had a college radio station, which was a lot of fun. But literally I did not plan on being a game designer professionally. I got out of college. This was 1979. Got a job designing air pollution control equipment. Our group had layoffs in the early 80s. And I used that time to write some tournaments for Gen Con. Mm-hmm. And on the strength of those was hired by TSR. So I never went back to engineering.
Wow.
So I say I don't design structures anymore. I design universes.
Yes. So an upgrade on scale, at least, right?
Yes, I build worlds.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that is just fantastic. And so when you ended up at TSR, you said you were writing some tournament modules. Yes. Kind of when you ended up at TSR, what were kind of some of the first things that you started working on?
Oh, gosh. When I joined TSR, we were still in the last parts of the old Hotel Claire, which was this dilapidated hotel in downtown Lake Geneva. We hadn't moved out to the Sheridan Springs office yet. And the first things I worked on was a magic marker adventure called Maze of the Riddling Minotaur, where you had this ink pen that would reveal the secret writing. And I used it to basically reveal the secret, the passage, and help you explore the dungeon. And these magic marker modules had a problem because the markers kept drying out.
Oh no!
So they had a definite life expectancy. The other thing that was the first thing on my list was a product called Burn Bush Wells for Boot Hill. Okay. And this was a case where Brian Bloom and Alan Hammock gave me a random encounter table for the wilderness and the design of a small town. And I had to come up with a game product based on those two components that we already had. It was like an episode of Chops. You open the mystery basket, and here we have, an encounter table, and here we have a map of Burn Bush Wells, and that's now go. You have 20 minutes, and as a result, it was fun. It was a challenge. The final product looked really good. It was the first time I had Larry Elmore as an artist for the cover, and he's just brilliant.
Oh gosh, yes.
And for Maze of the Riddling Minotaur, I would say it was Tim Truman was the cover artist for that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Larry Elmore's covers and his illustrations just always blew me away when I was a kid in the 80s. I mean, it's just, I don't know. You could see his stuff, like you'd just walk into the comic book shop or the game store and like his covers just jumped off the shelf. Like you could just... he had
incredible at TSR an era of incredibly good artists. Larry Elmore, Jeff Easley, Clyde Caldwell, Keith Parkinson. Later on, Brom joined the team. Janelle Jacquet was a part of the group. These were just, it was a really good group, and they did some fantastic work there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a wonderful documentary on Amazon Prime, I believe.
Yes, Eye of the Beholder.
Yes, Eye of the Beholder. It is a fantastic documentary, just an absolutely fantastic documentary about the art that went on for TSR and Dungeons and Dragons. It's amazing.
And they released a huge book called Art and Arcana.
Yes,
had a lot of the original art, including a piece that I'm hanging downstairs. In my library.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. There's also another game, though. There's a game you worked on kind of in the early 80s, Marvel Superheroes. Isn't that right?
Oh, yes.
Were you the lead designer of that?
Yes, it was. I was the guy who suggested it. Who recommended it. Originally, I had in college a game of Project Marvel Comics. PMC was the name. And it was a case where my regular Friday night dungeon group, we had just finished up a big epic adventure. We kind of worn out, we want to start the next thing. And I was reading comic books at the time, and I said, we do a comic book adventure. So they set themselves up as the West Lafayette Avengers. They were a junior achievement branch of the Avengers. This was for the West Coast Adventures and all the Great Lakes and all the rest of the franchises. So they were the junior achievement branch, and they had characters like Big Man on Campus, and Carl, the fire breather, and Superpin, the pro bowler of steel. And they would have adventures, and Marvel supervillains would visit West Lafayette. They blow up stuff, and at the end of the whole campaign, they went to New York to meet Mayor Koch and fight Spider-Man, but they met Spider-Man and fought Mayor Koch instead. So that was the tale of that. When I got to TSR, they were casting about and asking for, okay, what would be your blue sky project? What would you really want to work on? And I actually submitted a very dark cyberpunk type adventure that sort of ate its way through the bottom of the file cabinet. It was so dark and bitter. And they said, what else you got? And I said, well, I have this Marvel Superheroes game. Let's take a look. And they went out and we got the license.
Wow.
And we started working on this Marvel. And it was a very tight deadline. So I did the design work on Marvel. But for that first adventure, Steve Winter the editor, who's edited many other things I've worked on over the years. He did the physical writing. So all of that face front true believer, Stan Leesby comes from Steve, and it was just really great. And as a product, it reached out into a new area for the company, in that direct sale comic book shops were just taking off. And they were looking for things that they could carry, and that got role-playing games into a lot of direct sale comic shops.
Yeah.
So it sort of like opened doors for us. I truly enjoyed that game. It was really a lot of fun. The Universal Table is something I'm particularly proud of.
Yeah.
But I went through about 5 drafts of those before we got to the one that we used.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was going to say, I think it was like 83 or 84 or something like that. I was like 10 years old, maybe 11 years old. And I went to the game shop one day and I was going to buy, I had a little bit of money. I was going to buy something for Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
But our friend who introduced us to the game, he had given us a book. And so I went into this, for D&D, he had given us his old book. So I went into the store and I was thinking about buying stuff. And I realized, well, I have the rule book, but I saw Marvel Superheroes sitting on the shelf. And it was just like an old hobby shop back in the day. They're like the hobby shop where like my mom would buy like quilting supplies or something. Right. But they had a game section for some reason, and mostly war games, but then there were role-playing games there. And so I saw that there. And what was popular at the time was the show, the Amazing Spidey Friends or whatever. I can't remember the name.
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Yes, Spider-Man and His Amazing.
Firestar and Iceman.
Yes.
And Miss Lion was the dog.
Yes. Yes. And that was like, I watched that like every Saturday. Like it was so popular. So I just grabbed Marvel Superheroes. And what blew me away about it was, I'm like 10 years old, right? I had been playing D&D for like a year with some of my friends. Like none of like Dungeons and Dragons, like I didn't really know any of the rules, right? Like, they told us what to do and I tried to just interpret what we were doing. But like, Marvel Superheroes, I was able as my like 10-year-old self to open up the book, read the whole thing and play it by the rules. And it just blew me away. It just blew me away because it was simple, but it was complex at the same time, right? It was just perfect. Like I could just read it, understand the rules. The universal table in it was fantastic because for people who are listening, right, you would just roll the dice and you would just consult this table and it would tell you kind of what happened. It was just fantastic.
It is a descendant of the CRTs, the critical result table, combat result tables of the old war games. Because one of the first war games I played was Panzer Blitz, which basically was a bookcase game, and you pulled it out of a little bookcase, and there on the inside sleeve was the combat results table, and that's what you needed. That was the central moment to moment play.
Yeah. And it was just, I don't know. It just made everything so easy. It just, it made play really easy. And then of course it came with some pre-gen cards of like Wolverine and Spider-Man and some of the other, the well-known characters. And so we could just jump right in with just that information on a card. And I played with a number of my friends. And this was where kind of with Marvel Superheroes, like, with D&D at the time, like I was running people through dungeons, but like Marvel Superheroes really let me kind of cut my teeth as a game master because, we're in a contemporary city and I got to do, some more wide ranging things. I had to think of, this villain, is robbing, Doc Ock is robbing the Federal Reserve Bank or something that and so it kind of opened up my world as a game master. And so I had so much fun playing that game. That game was good. It was incredible. Absolutely incredible.
It amazes me. People are, it's been first edition came out in 84. Yeah. So we're talking 30 plus years. And there are still websites and people playing it and they get excited about it. And I think that's just great. So
it was just a ton of fun to play that game. Sadly, I don't have my original copy anymore. It was destroyed at some point, but I just had so much. I've considered every once in a while I'll check on eBay, and I just like maybe I should pick it up. But
I don't know.
Yeah.
Nostalgia is a terrible thing.
It is, and but it was just so much fun because I was thinking about introducing it to my kids, because it was. I just remember it being so easy to play.
How old are they?
My kids. I started a little late, so I have 7, 5, 3, and 1, so or under 1. But
okay,
yeah. So we have a full house, but I've started introducing them to some other games. I picked up Amazing Tales, which is a great game for kids, and then I also introduced them to the West End Star Wars game. Which
my wife's a big fan of the West End Star Wars games. She's had a campaign that's with friends, and they've been running for 20 plus years. So,
I loved that one because that was a great kind of like a gateway game when I was in like junior high and high school, because I could just say, do you know Star Wars? And somebody would be like, yeah, of course. Of course I've seen Star Wars. Do you want to play in there?
And that's one of the vectors of getting people into role-playing games. I'm comfortable. I know superheroes. I know Star Wars. Yes. I know this stuff. So therefore, it's a way of expressing yourself. And also, you know about the world. You have an expectation of, I'm in New York City. There goes Spider-Man. I know what I'm doing here. Fantasy adventures take a little more time. They have a little more lead up. That's the whole trope of we meet in a bar is very comfortable because people know that environment before they start going off.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, because I would, mention something about, say, Dungeons and Dragons to somebody who had never played before. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't read, Lord of the Rings or fantasy novels, it was kind of hard for them to understand, nowadays with the movies. With the movies and everything.
Well, the movies coming out, people putting things on YouTube, casting games, a lot of, Stephen Colbert, people basically making references to it, and again, the whole generation has grown up, and it's become part of the mass market culture.
Yes. Yeah, like people in their 40s who played in the 80s are now in control of everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Or 40s or 50s, they're just like in control of everything. So they want to talk about stuff that they liked when they were kids. Yeah. And Dungeons and Dragons
the world was new and it was cool. So
yeah, absolutely. And so so that was kind of always a barrier there. And then too, I mean, we always loved Dungeons and Dragons, but there was just a time when it was really expensive, and as a junior high student and trying to scrape together money from a paper route, rolling papers like I did at my neighbor's house or whatever, and the West End game, Star Wars was like, I just bought 2 of the books and was able to run my friends through some quick games, and that was just a huge thing, like I said, a gateway game to really involve people and introduce people to role-playing games, which I still try to do quite often actually. But as you mentioned, nowadays we have so many resources. But before we move on, I wanted to just also mention, while you were at TSR, you also created Spelljammer, isn't that right?
Yes, many years later.
Yes,
so,
and
AD&D in space.
Yes, AD&D in space. And sadly, I know I was mentioning before we started recording. Me and a friend of mine, we poured over the Spelljammer books. He bought a lot of them. We were just never really able to pull off, playing it to because of, like I was kind of just talking about, it was just there was kind of a dead zone kind of after some of the, I guess, at least where we were kind of in the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons, and it was hard to find some players. It was, hard to get a game together.
For the longest time, it was a case. There were two bumps in the age demographic. One for young people until they hit the age when they could drive, and then we lose them for a while, and then they can come back after they've gone to college and they're locked up for a while. Yeah. So they basically have limited opportunities to get around, and both of those situations were very, very helpful for us as far as the games were concerned. Yeah, absolutely. So it was very sad. Spelljammer was very much everything turned up to 11. Yeah, that was very much trying to push back the whole, D&D, that's traditional fantasy. And so we take, crystal spheres and ships that look like manta rays and then nautiloids and everything. And D&D in space. That's still that, standard, fantasy. Okay, we just pushed back the borders of what is standard fantasy.
What kind of inspired you to put D&D in space? We were going to the design team was going to work on some new boxed games. That was the general purview. And Jim Ward, who was our manager at the time, took us to a local restaurant called Augie's, and we started pitching ideas over lunch and most of the afternoon. And the wait staff wasn't quite sure about us and was convinced that our second in command, Warren Spector, was Steve Spielberg, and we were talking about movies. So... But the image I pitched to Jim was, I've got a fantasy warrior standing on the deck of a ship in space. And he doesn't float away, and he doesn't have problems breathing, and he can have adventures. And that's the initial concept. And you see that on the cover. Yeah.
When you see that,
I'm sold.
Well, it started off with very high concept, and from that we just sprawled in all directions. I would make a list of the ship types we could have, and Jim Holloway would basically draw them up, and then we turn them over to Dave LaForce Diesel, and who's one of our map makers, and he would basically figure out how it works. And we came up with our own cosmology and how gravity works in a fantasy universe, and how we have crystal spheres, which was taken from an old lithograph, the guy poking through the crystal spheres and seeing the wonders of the heavens, how they operate, the clockwork behind it, which wasn't really done in the Middle Ages, but was done in like the 18th century. But still, it was presented as a medieval picture. And this became the basis for Spelljammer, basically just expanding out and creating a system by which you could go among the planets as well as go from campaign to campaign.
Yeah.
So Faerun, Forgotten Realms, had its own crystal sphere, and Kryn, Dragonlance, had its own sphere, and Greyhawk had its own sphere. And so basically, you could make, so everybody has different stars. We could do things in the heavens, and we just go from plane to go from sphere to sphere. And it's still part of the D&D lore. The new Baldur's Gate did a video a while back that showed a nautiloid flying in over a city, which just said, "Ooh, I remember that."
Yeah, and I just remember, like I said, kind of poring over the books. I mean, well, number one, like we've already mentioned, the art was phenomenal.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I mean, it was just so creative and so fantastic, and just some of the concepts and stuff just kind of really I don't know, it was just I was a crazy 14 or 15-year-old who was obsessed with role-playing games, so it was just like D&D in space, oh my gosh, like I'm there, and it was just some of the concepts, and I really liked kind of the idea of taking instead of science fiction, kind of the fantasy, space fantasy kind of.
It is very much space fantasy.
Yeah.
And again, D&D has a heritage of that. We go back to Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which had much more of a science fiction-y background. You basically explore a dungeon that turns out to be a crashed spaceship.
Yeah.
And, you encounter robots. And so this is part of our heritage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's, and now that you mention that, of course, that D&D seems to kind of just, be able to bring in almost like everything, right? Like it's just like there's like little bits of everything that you can find, because like, you're right. It's just like a spaceship. Okay. That's fine. Like, you're just like, how does that work? Like, it doesn't work in Tolkien, but it works in D&D because you can just just bring it all in. Yeah.
The Forgotten Realms, which I worked on with Ed Greenwood, had a noted tendency to be able to pick up everything.
Yeah.
On one occasion, I'm working at TSR, and my manager comes over and says, "You know what the Realms needs? Zeppelins." And I look at him and goes, "Yeah, Zeppelins. You should put Zeppelins in the game, Jeff." And I said, "Okay, hang on." And I called Ed Greenwood, who was working as a librarian up in Canada. And I said, "Ed, you won't believe the most recent request I've got is to put Zeppelins in the realms." And Ed, without missing a beat, says, "Oh, you must mean the sky ships of Halrua down to the south. The magical kingdom there has great floating ships that they take everywhere." I go, "Okay, that's good." I go back down and talk to my boss. I say, "We can give you Zeppelins, but only because we like you." So,
yeah, he already had them worked out, right?
Oh, he had them worked out. He had put them in an article in Dragon magazine, 2 years previously.
Yeah.
Ed Greenwood had an incredible ability to generate text and ideas. He just would come up with things one after another.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's almost become a trope nowadays, right? If you're watching a movie or you're reading a book and an airship shows up, you're in an alternate reality.
Alternate world. Yes. Alternate worlds have airships.
Yes. Yeah. Like
they aren't in the real world. They're not the fastest things in the world. So,
yeah, no.
There was a company that did airship tours. I'm up in Seattle, and for my birthday, my wife gave me a trip on an airship. And It was real cool and it was exciting, but we did move very slowly.
Wow, that's neat. But yeah, there's always the tip off. Yes, if you see an airship, you're in an alternate world. But hey, yeah, airships and D&D done. You're just like, that sounds great. That sounds awesome. But yeah, Spelljammer, it is one of those things where I really liked kind of the combination of some of the kind of the medieval or ancient elements that were kind of then brought in, like the spheres you were mentioning, or even I don't know if there were like if I'm remembering it right, like some Ptolemaic kind of elements and stuff, like just like taking some of that old knowledge and being like, yeah, that's real. That's real.
Well, yeah,
it's all real.
We did make the Greyhawk's spheres to be what the planet is in the center, as opposed to, so it's a geocentric. So it wasn't the same as like Dragonlance or Forgotten Realms, which had solar-centric planets as well. So yeah, we played games with it. We pulled a lot of science and pseudoscience in. Between the crystal spheres, there is a substance called phlogistin, and this is a extremely explosive, burnable stuff. Basically, it's the cotton padding between the spheres, keeping them from bumping into each other. But the name of that comes from early theories from the Enlightenment about why stuff burned. And the British theory was that there was this component trait called phlogistin that you can't measure, but that's what causes things to burn. It's a lot like when we talk about dark matter nowadays. We know it works because it makes the math work. And so that was their theory. The French theory was fire is merely very rapid oxidation. And the British laughed at them because, of course, that made no sense. And of course, that was what it is eventually. But that's where we pulled phlogistin, this explosive substance between the spheres, into our world from that concept.
Yeah. I mean, just kind of all of those concepts were just fantastic because I don't know. There's always something about kind of reading about some of, like the alchemists and things and just being like, it's all real, right? It's just tell me it's all real because it's so cool, and seeing some of those elements, in Spelljammer, it just fit the world, absolutely. It just fit the world perfectly.
And again, it's something that basically the pieces of it continue on to this day. I'm seeing people still using Spelljammer and things within D&D. Every so often, WotC basically shows a picture of a GIF, a human-headed, a hippo-headed humanoid, and all the fans online go, "They're going to do Spelljammer." No, they're just rattling your cage, folks. So.
Well, we're still holding out hope because Spelljammer 5e would be amazing.
Spelljammer 5e would be good. A lot of the old worlds would fit nicely, and they've done a really good job on a lot of the old campaigns as well. Because the way they're doing is they're doing a book as opposed to a box set and 5 products and then another box set and then 5 more products.
Yes,
they basically have a little more self-contained process right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you also worked on Al-Qadim?
Al-Qadim.
Yeah.
Iranian Adventures.
Yeah. It's very strange because I hadn't heard of that one, or I don't remember it from when I was younger, but through a weird quirk of fate, I now have like the first edition little box set of it because my brother-in-law a couple years ago moved into a new house, and he is like, "Hey, Matt, we found this, old box of junk in the attic. It has some I think there's like a D&D book or something. Do you want it?" And I was like, "I want it right now. I want it right now." And so I'm going through it, and it has like a basic handbook and a few other things, and it has an Al-Qadim, box set in there. And so I've looked through it.
I do joke that I've gone from I played your games when I was a kid to my parents played your games when they were kids to we were cleaning out Grammy's attic and we found something with your name on it. But when you say a box set, was it the Zakara, the blue one, the blue box? Or was it one of the small, because all the small adventures for that were like in 1/4-inch deep boxes. We didn't do like them in folio.
Oh, I think it is a 1/4-inch deep box, and it has a skull on the cover with sand or something, I think.
That one's not ringing a bell right now.
Oh god,
it'll come to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have it in my closet, but if I get up, I'll make a lot of noise.
No problem.
Yeah, but it was, and I found that very interesting too because there is, I guess, people will always say, "Oh, well, there's this certain type of fantasy," but fantasy can be like in any kind of cultural, background or, and so I thought that was a very interesting one, kind of D&D in Arabian Nights. I mean, again, a perfect fit, I think.
Zen Cook had done an Oriental Adventures book several years before. And the idea of opening the doors to the Mideastern lore, not just the Arabian Nights, but the whole area, the whole region. And we had talked about it off and on, and we got the green light to start producing this. John Pickens, who was one of our other designers, showed up at my office with 2 huge boxes of books. And he said, "I knew you were going to want these, so I've been sort of accumulating these over the past 2 years." They had some great texts in there, there was like a Marxist analysis of Arabian tribal culture that had been published in Leningrad, that sort of thing. And it was really a lot of great stuff that we could basically utilize within it. Al-Qadim, I was crediting Steve Winter before. Let me say nice things about Andrea Hayday, who did fantastic work on the Alcademe core rules, and was responsible for in part for the incredible look and feel that we had within those products. I mean, it was a very ornate, opulent product.
Yeah, which fits with the culture perfectly, right?
Yeah,
like the palaces and things.
And as a culture, it's much more cosmopolitan. We don't have these elves versus dwarves type of, rivalry that we see in traditional Western fantasy. It opened the doors to basically tell different types of stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I would have heard of it back then, but it looked fantastic as I was looking through some of it. I was just like, well, again, it was just like, this makes perfect sense for D&D to take somebody to a different place in a different world, and because who wouldn't want to who wouldn't want to be Sinbad or, go on adventures with Sinbad and rescue, people and things like that in that kind of context, because it's so exotic in them. Yeah. And so, now at TSR, you obviously did, a number of things for a long time, but of course you moved on, but you also ended up writing a number of short stories and novels, I believe, right?
Yes. I've done like 16 novels over the years and a huge number of short stories, most of them in shared worlds, most of them for like the Realms or Dragonlance. Did some for Magic the Gathering. I wrote a Star Wars novel, a lot of short stories, and they often come in from a phrase that friends are within the company are basically putting together an anthology. You got a story? Well, how about this one? Okay, that sounds good. It was very, very low key. So, but my first novel was with my wife, Kate Novak, as my co-writer. This was in the early days of the Forgotten Realms, and we still were finding our feet as far as writers were concerned. And I had a concept, and I started explaining to her what the story idea was as we were driving to Milwaukee one day. And by the time I got there, I had a co-writer. And one of the characters had changed genders, and and that was the start of our team up. We've worked on like 6 books together, and it just came together very nicely, and I was very happy with where we ended up. Azure Dawns was the first one they built, made a computer game based on it, so a lot of people remember it from the computer game.
Oh wow, that's really neat. And I guess I'm just wondering then. Obviously the process would be completely different from creating a setting to creating a novel. It's just maybe, I don't know if I'm going to word this right, but like, what is, does creating settings for role-playing games just really kind of prepare you to write a novel, or does a novel help you when you're creating a setting?
It helps a little. It helps you with setting. It helps you with the expository dialogue. It helps you with the underpinning to make sense. But within a novel, we're worried about much. But that's all support work for character development, for character arc, for conversation, for dialogue. Kate and I are very, very fortunate in the fact that we do banter well. And you'll find that in our novels when we work together. People talk and they talk, and it's an amusing talk. But that is not so much what you see when you're world building itself. Also, with world building, you're often in the worlds that I've helped construct. I've always been looking for creating hooks, creating pieces where people can hook on their concepts, where they can say, "Ooh, I see that, and I can use that, and I can take it over here." So basically, we're building worlds where a lot of people can participate. Writing a novel, a short story is much more of a personal thing. And basically, so you're not necessarily going to see a lot of people hooking into it. They may, if it's popular, your editors always will have comments. But it works from you come at it from a different angle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just released my first novel in June of 2021, and
congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Plug. What is it?
It's called the Spaceport Gambit. It is a science fiction novel. It's just a kind of a short, quick romp. It's on Amazon and so it's called the Spaceport Gambit. And I'm
going to ask you: is it published, or is it Kindle? Is it an ebook, or is it a physical book?
All of that, all of the above.
Okay.
It's Kindle, it's paperback and a hardback. So all on Amazon. And
that's Amazon for all of your book buying needs.
Yes, and we're gonna we'll probably hear about Amazon a little bit more in just a few minutes. As much as you can say, of course. But and I just think too, I mean, this brings up kind of something I talk about on the podcast all the time. I just think that game masters kind of just secretly want to be novelists, really. I mean, or it's novelists.
Actors.
Yes, or like directors want to be actors, or and so game masters want to be novelists, or sometimes novelists moonlight as game masters, perhaps. But
the walls between the worlds are getting thinner, so you're seeing a lot more of that. So
yes, absolutely, and it's just. I think, and like I said, I've mentioned it before on the podcast, it's just so that tabletop role-playing games just bring out like so much of a person's creativity, right? On so many levels that, for me, once I got a taste of that at 9 years old, like I couldn't stop, right? Like I just couldn't stop. Because once, if you have a creative bone in your body and you enjoy stories, once you hit tabletop role-playing games, like, to me, there's just nothing like it, because you just, it is kind of the closest thing to writing a novel or directing, a movie that you can do, but as 12 years old with a group of friends or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's also collaborative in nature.
Yes.
It's more than, writing your novel in secret in the evenings. It is much more of the idea that you have a group and, you can have plans, and then the players will go off on their own and they'll come up with stuff you've never imagined, and they'll add stuff to it, and they'll bring characters, they'll bring depth, they'll bring the world, they'll make the world live. Yes. In many cases, you may have the past 200 years of history laid out for your town, but it's only when they arrive in the town that it truly comes to life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in my gaming group now, there's, one or two people that I've been playing with for a long time, like 25 years. And
long-standing relationships do come out of RPGs.
They do. And I am still... I shouldn't be really, but I am still shocked what comes out of their mouth, right? Like when we give them a new character or give a new setting or a new scenario or something, I'm like, all right, so now let's go ahead and do this. And I'm thinking, oh, I know this guy. I've known this guy for, 25 years. And then like, he'll just say something and you're just like, oh my gosh, where did that come from? Right. Like, and that's the joy of it. Right. I mean, we're just always surprised by what somebody else is going to do.
I still have a regular gaming group. We play on Saturday nights and on Monday nights with slightly different people. But we have like a core, and myself, Steve Winter, who I mentioned before, a Tolkien scholar named John Ratliff, a cartoonist, designer, raconteur named Stan with an exclamation point.
Oh, okay.
And a programmer who fell in with us in Luis, and friends like Ann and Sig and others that have become part of this hub of friends that we continue to play games with.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing gaming group right there. Some good credentials on
it's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say. Our Saturday night group tends to play Call of Cthulhu.
Okay.
But recently, John is running us through AD&D first edition material. So we've hauled out our own old hardbacks, and we're going through things like we're not using them, but we're talking about segments and encumbrance
Okay.
And and spell casting time, weapon length, and a lot of stuff that was in first edition D&D that has gone past the wayside.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's interesting. That is really interesting. Before I kind of ask what you're working on now, even though I kind of teased it a little bit, when you're designing a setting, say, obviously a lot of people who listen to the podcast are running their own games, and since you've created so many settings, what makes a good setting? Like if you kind of alluded to it with hooks, but maybe you can kind of expand on that. What if
that's something I do? Yeah, it's a whole question of how accessible it is.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about hooks before. I did work on a project for the known world of D&D called Mystara, and the known world is really, really good, but I found it very difficult to get into and expand out from other players because I refer to it as trying to bite a billiard ball. All the pieces were nicely tucked in and fit together so well. So how are you going to get players into this? How is it going to become accessible for people? And we came up with stuff. We found some cool stuff that was involved with it. But the whole thing I say is, as far as a D&D campaign, as far as a tabletop role-playing campaign, it's a whole question of how the players are going to engage. You can lay down basic rules. You are in the lands of the Arabian Nights. It's a storytelling place. It's a cosmopolitan place. It's an area of beautiful cities and wide, wild deserts. And they can buy in on that and basically build from that as a component. If you laid out every closet and chamber pot between Waterdeep and Cormyr, that sort of it does create a barrier to people. Yeah. There's too much that they feel they need to know in order to expand out. The comic book universes, are sort of that, have that challenge as well, because there's just so much history for the comic book universes. Yeah. But the idea of making it accessible for what Spider-Man is like now, what's the cinematic universe, what's he like, is I think one thing that makes those worlds very accessible for people.
Yeah, I think your point there is really good about kind of maybe giving players or giving somebody blank space to kind of, to create within, because if you have your timeline from whatever the creation of the world, all the way from the War of the Gods, all to the whatever, and you have it all laid out. It's like, where do they interact with that?
Where do heroes interact? Where do players interact? And we've done that. I mean, the Realms has a very powerful history. Dragonlance has an extremely, detailed history. And yet there's still room and space within there for the heroes to have a part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's good. And one of the most critical things that I learned as a game master was to rely on my players as resources, because they are many, many times as creative, or certainly more creative than I am. And if you give, if you just lay out, say, hey guys, I was thinking about playing something like, D&D in Arabian Nights, all of a sudden just ideas and stuff start coming from them, right? Like they just start saying, oh, well, can I be a caravan leader? Can I be, whatever? And you just like, oh, I hadn't even thought of some of these things or something.
Actually, and I talk about this when when we start out projects, that there are two big questions that form the foundation of your core ethos of your world, which is, who are you and what do you want? And the answer to those questions can take you in many different places. In the Forgotten Realms, you are an adventurer, and you're seeking to establish your name and become powerful and wealthy. In Dragonlance, you are a hero, and you're seeking to fight against the forces of Takesis. So basically, those types of, what identity and goal basically helps set up what you want to do with the world.
Yeah. So who are you and what do you want? So those two questions, can set up the world like that. Absolutely. And, and obviously I've been talking to you a long time. I could still keep asking you tons of questions, but, what are you currently working on? And you kind of like emphasize the name Amazon, but I know we can't talk about it too much.
I am currently, my day job is I'm working as a narrative director, narrative designer, I'll correct that, for Amazon Games.
Mhm.
I'm working on a project that we haven't revealed yet, so I can say nothing about it.
Okay.
But also in my copious spare time, I just finished an essay for Kobold Publishing for the Kobold Guide to World Building, the new volume that they're putting together.
Mhm.
I just sent it out on Saturday or something, and where I'm doing a lot of talking about how worlds, how ideas travel through different hands in a shared universe, and they expand and they grow and they take their own meaning over time, and much how you do it with your player characters as well, where basically you are creating the setting, you're doing the set, you're laying it out, and then the actors arrive on the stage and things start growing and things start getting more important. So I do that. And one thing I do for myself is I write plays. This is a hobby experience for me. I've got a little playwriting group that we all took a playwriting class about 5 years ago. We're still together, and we're all writing scenes and basically reading them once a month. And I've had a table reading for one of my plays at a local theater, but it hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't gotten anything major, but it's been fun, and I've been enjoying it. And there's a big difference between working within a large company on an IP is everybody has to have their vote. It's a very consensus-driven operation. Everybody has input. A lot of it's really good. But when you write a play, someone can say, I don't like this in the third act. And you can say, oh, that's nice. And you can go away and not talk to them again. So, you basically have a little more personal investment in that writing for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that sounds awesome. And it is, it just seems like you're just always looking for some kind of creative outlet then with your,
Seb Cook once said that we get bored designers get bored easily. And that's, I think very true in the fact that we are always looking for new areas new worlds to play in, new ideas to turn around, new genres to break into. You're writing computer games, but you want to play more with theater. You're doing in theater, you want to talk more about novels. So it's this shifting of gears that happen. I'm very fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm sure it was quite a leap from tabletop to computer games.
Well, yeah, yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the first novel my wife and I wrote, that got turned into a computer game, and I had a small part of that.
Uh-huh.
And but I left WotC, part of the layoff, was working for various other small companies in the Seattle area, and someone contacted me about basically doing some world building for a game in Germany. And that sort of opened the door to that particular avenue. And, they're working to work with for ArenaNet on Guild Wars. It was a case where, I had a friend who was an editor at Wizards of the Coast, and we would after he left Wizards, we would get together once a month and play Magic at a local restaurant, Magic the Gathering. And he said, I'd like to bring a friend the next time. And he brought the co-owner of the company, and we met well, and we got along. And when an opportunity presented itself, I went and joined them over at ArenaNet. So a lot of Nightfall, Guild Wars 2 are, again, that world building, that creating a universe where a lot of people can participate, not just players, but other creatives as well. Mm. And we can build a larger place. And from there, I jumped over to Amazon, and I've been there a little bit more over 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, it's just really, yeah.
The other big difference between this is computer games take a long time. Whereas I'm very used to, back at TSR, you'd write an adventure, it's 32 pages long. That's nice. 2 months later, you'll write another one. 2 months after that, the first one you wrote would be out. There was a very instant gratification going on there. Within computer games, it's a lot more. Everything you see in a computer game is there because somebody sweat bullets to put it there. And they just, all sorts of pain and agony just to get it on the bloody screen. And so that's one of the challenges that we look at, differences between tabletop and computers.
Yeah. And it is interesting. I didn't really realize it until I started, the podcast and started interviewing people. But because I've interviewed Mike Bro, who used to work at TSR as well. And I didn't, like in the kind of late 80s or early 90s, I would play a video game and I'd be like, man, this feels like D&D. And then it wasn't really until I realized that a lot of the people who worked on D&D were making those video games.
It took a while. There was a period where it was very difficult to make the transition over. But I think that a lot of people who have, as we were talking about, grew up playing D&D are now looking and saying, "Ooh, we can get that designer. That guy. I remember his stuff. I really liked it. Let's go do this." Yeah. And these are the type of games I played and enjoyed it. Earlier computer games, the person who was in charge of the story was probably the guy who owned the company, or the lead designer. Yeah. Or, basically someone who was basically from a more technical end. It's only in the last decade that you've really seen a growth of narrative as a component within computer games. And they've done wonderful stuff with it, but but it's only in this period that we're really seeing a lot more people whose job first and foremost is story.
Yeah, absolutely. And as technology improves and the games get more immersive, I mean, it's just always about story, right? It's always about the story.
Ultimately, that's the underpinning that basically, because I think we can get wonderful art and we can get great graphics, but you have to have a reason. Narrative creates a stickiness that basically attracts people, brings them in, and then holds them as they're going and grinding for the next level or going on that epic quest or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
TV.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, where can people learn more about you? Do you have a website or some writing they can check out?
I have a blog, and I hesitate bringing it up because it doesn't always talk about games.
Okay.
Grubb Street, Grubb Street, .blogspot.com. And it is a host of book reviews, theater reviews, very local politics, and it's sometimes collectible quarters. So occasionally, upon a great rarity, I say use the search command. There will be essays about Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms and Spelljammer in space.
All right. Well, I will be sure to put a link in the show notes to your blog, as well as to some of the products that I can find out there, possibly on DriveThruRPG. I'll try to put some links in the show notes. So anybody who's listening right now can head over to dicegeeks.com and find the show notes for this episode. You'll find some links where you can learn more about Jeff and his writing. Well, Jeff,
Kobold Guides. I would recommend.
Oh, yes, from the Kobold Guides. Yes, I'll try to put a link to the Kobold Guides as well. Well, Jeff, it was just an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you.
All right, there you have it, guys. Oh, my goodness. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jeff today. It was such a pleasure just to be able to speak with him. No joke, Marvel Superheroes was an incredible, incredible game for my little 10, 11-year-old self, which was enamored with superheroes role-playing games. It was fantastic. So to speak with the man who designed it was incredible, and also Spelljammer, just like I mentioned in the episode, I just have these very clear memories of just poring over Spelljammer books and just being blown away by D&D in space, which is still an awesome idea. All right, as I mentioned in the episode, I have provided links where you can check out Jeff's blog and some of his books and titles that he has worked on in the past. I have links there in the show notes at dicegeeks.com. Head over there right now, check those out. Okay, guys, if you want some free stuff, you can head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 20 free dungeon maps, a new character background, and a whole bunch of other little tidbits to help you in your gaming hobbies. Also, you'll never miss an episode of this show, and each and every Friday you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in this wild, wild world of Dice Geeks. Okay, guys, it is my privilege to come to you each and every week with a new episode. I really hope you enjoy these episodes. If you do, you can drop me a line and let me know. My email address is just matt@dicegeeks.com. Really simple. So you can drop me a line, let me know what you think of the show, let me know what I can do to improve, anything. All right, guys? So, until next Wednesday, keep gaming.